I'm not a fancy person, so I'm just going to talk. But I do want to reflect a little bit on the fact that the sum of the total is so much greater than each of us, and I'm learning so much. So it's kind of a tricky balance point to be here and talk about going to school and how that piece fits. And it's so exciting that there are other teachers here, because sometimes I felt like I was sort of the only one, and it's an awesome responsibility to speak for all teachers, but it's nice to share that. I'm going to tell a little bit about what I'm doing in this moment, and I know some of you heard a little bit about this experience that I'm lucky enough to be a part of that started last year. This little school is where I'm spending much of my thinking time, even though I'm not there physically every day. But this school is an amazing laboratory for me to learn. I work as a contractor, as a consultant to this pre-K program in rural Oklahoma. And Warren, so I'll just you can keep the tape rolling. If you cut this part out, please. I'm going to share some data about the school, and we don't want it to go out. It has this whole idea about what are the fears we have in education, early education especially, about technology, and then what the realities are. And I admit that for more than 20 years, I've been wrong about some of the things. So I'm learning a lot. I just want to share a couple of those stories today. One of the fears was isolation. And they fear that when you put technology in every child's hand, it'll isolation. We put a book in a child's hand and we don't have isolation when they're 3 or 4. I mean, in this picture, they're all gathered around one book. And the same kind of thing happens even when they each have a tablet. That was not surprising to me, but it was surprising to many, though for years I have said no one-to-one in early childhood. We need kids to have shared experiences, and the truth of the matter is they're sharing more now, which is very interesting. Virtually all these children are not reading. I think we have one 4-year-old group, one student who is able to read words on a page, but only 1 out of 120 children. So we have some distance to go. One of the fears often is that they'll stop playing. That if we have technology, they won't have playground time or art time or something else. And we've already seen the movement at this school, only not even a year and a half in, that the teachers are now comfortable enough that they'll be playing and the kids will want to document something, and now they'll come in and get their iPad and go out and document it and take the iPad back. We don't see a degradation of that. Now, I'm not a researcher, not a formal researcher. We're not keeping data on that, but it's very clear that that's not one of the things that's changed. One of the other fears is that they'll break them. The fear is so strong that they would break them, and they put them in cases that the children can no longer control the device. The buttons were so stiff they couldn't push the button and change the volume. So we've used some razor blades and cut out some of those buttons, but we've had 0 breakage by children. We've had adults break 1, and no children breakage. My theory on that is when a child who's 3 drops it, they're very close to the floor to begin with. They tend not to use them on tabletops. You'll see some pictures of them on tabletops, but that doesn't happen very often. One of the other fears is that we would disenfranchise them from their parents. This is not a population where these children all came in already using tablets. Maybe my personal assessment was about half had used smartphones, and mom had handed it to them in the bank or wherever they were. But not a lot of experience, and so one of the most amazing accomplishments to me of these teachers who were not technologically literate, very highly literate, of 7, 3 had flip phones in January 2015. That's only last January. By last April, so only 4 months in, they all had class blogs. That's a huge accomplishment by these teachers. So we've seen some really exciting things. Their class blogs are not child-generated yet. They're moving slightly in that direction, but remember, 3-year-olds aren't going to do blogs. But this is a 3-year-old classroom, and she's sharing with them their class blogs, so then they go home, their parents will want to go see the class blog. And it's a scrapbook. I mean, really, that's what it is. Sharing some successes, sharing what they're doing, those kinds of things. Since I was here, a little bit about what happens and what it looks like. It looks a lot like this. They happen to be playing bugs and buttons in this classroom. Free play with math, no instruction tied to it. Would I like to see more instruction tied to it? Yes. But is this an appropriate use of their free play? Yes, I think it's fine. But their elbows are almost interlocked.
Such a lovely picture.
And you think about 2 3-year-olds laying on the floor doing anything individually so close to someone else, and they're just coexisting, co-playing, and they'll every once in a while stop and show each other. That's a big thing to see and watch. There's some things that we've learned. They do have interactive whiteboards. They're not used very much except as a screen to project on, although there's one classroom, they use it for some student activities when they have choice. We've taught them a lot about caring for the devices. That little girl's hugging it. That's how they carry them. They hug it like they love it, and that's how they carry it from place to place, trying to get away from the wild swings of something in one hand. By the way, they're teaching them to do the same thing with books because they do wild swings with books as well. So this is not an unusual thing to be teaching them. The children plug in and unplug their own devices from the chargers in all but one of the classrooms. That was a big journey for the 3-year-old teachers. They didn't want the children. They were afraid they would break something. They're doing that on their own. Remember how little a 3-year-old is. Mm-hmm. A 3-year-old can't read their own name. So they've put a different sticker when each child has their own icon now, and all the iPads are iconed in the 3-year-old classrooms because all the cases are identical. So they've figured out some ways to make them more independent. I may or may not have shown this video last time, but I know a lot of people are here. In this picture, the reading specialist comes down and once a month comes into these classrooms and does a lesson. And she had never used an iPad when I got there and didn't know how to turn it on or even what it would do, but very shortly thereafter she came in and I happened to be there, and she read a story to the class. And when she was done reading the story, she handed out QR codes to the class and asked them to scan the QR code because it would take them to a video, a YouTube video, of an alternative ending to the book. Wow, that's like chaos, right? So here's what it sounds like. It sounds like chaos. But are they watching the ending? They have no headphones. We don't do headphones. That's a pretty amazing thing to me. They wanted to see, after they all watched the video, some of them watched it more than once, then she brought them back together and they talked about the 2 endings. And this particular group is 4-year-olds. It's pretty sophisticated use. QR codes is one of the big uses that we've come across.
They like that, and teachers are okay with QR.
They love it.
We've had quite a lot of resistance to QR because it's used so often for advertising and marketing, and so people think of it as a kind of dirty thing. But you haven't found that.
No, we've been very careful. I mean, this was the first time they had ever seen it. We knew this visiting teacher knew that they had an app. We use Enigma. It's the fastest QR code reader I've ever seen or found. It runs on every platform, so we standardized on that. So parent phones are using that as well. So the kids very quickly learned what that icon looks like, and they use it a lot. This year we started at the beginning of the year, the 3-year-old classes started using QR code scanning in about week 10. Do I think they could have used it sooner? Yes. But I only visit once or twice a month, so I come and I'm the little nudge to get them to try something. So I think that's going to happen faster. This was the first time I was modeling with it. It's not a great model, but it is what it is. I don't know if you can hear it, it's really soft.
Tell me what these are.
So we're starting to get children to talk about their work, and that has now taken off. This was last fall, and by this spring, children are choosing to tell about their work to their own iPad, and then going back and reflecting on it another day. That is magic, right? It's magic. So we're seeing 4-year-olds. The 3s don't do that yet because they're 3. But the 4-year-olds will take a picture of their work and record their own voice saying, I drew a cat and the cat is fat, or whatever they want to say. And we'll see them 2 or 3 days later going back to where they recorded it and watching that recording, and sometimes saying things like, can I add more words? Or sometimes, can I do a new picture? I don't like my cat picture anymore, or whatever it is. So that kind of starting self-reflection is really exciting because that will lead us to where we share that. So That's pretty exciting stuff.
It has interesting implications, I think, when you think about how children learn to compose text. So much of what they do in the early years is verbal,
Yes.
and we lose that with paper and pencil.
Yes.
And so we're capturing it, and so what you're enabling is a young child to engage in a revision process,
Yes.
which before this technology was very rarely possible.
These are magic moments. You're exactly right. She can put the academic language on it, which I think is really important for us to understand. But the power of being able to go back to something you did before is, I mean, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old doesn't remember that they put their shoes on sometimes. I mean, their days are incredibly busy, so that's pretty powerful. We continue to struggle with the 3s taking photographs. They always take 12 or some random number of pictures. That isn't something we've been able to extinguish as a behavior yet. They've all learned now to erase their pictures, and they're handling that on their own. Yes.
I just had a quick question about the previous slide.
Uh-huh.
Have you considered, I know it's not free, but have you considered introducing Doodlecast so they can actually have?
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
There are many challenges at this site, and I don't want it to be only about this site, but this is a pre-K through 8th grade school that has no full-time or even half-time or even part-time tech support person. They have a contracted person who lives 2.5 hours away, who charges them by the day, including travel time. So when he comes out, they pay for a full day and they get 3 hours, but he's split between pre-K all the way up to 8th grade. So you can tell that there's some huge issues here. But they're making a difference even in spite of that. These teachers didn't have any control of the apps on their iPads until recently. Some still don't have any control. So someone else decides what apps are on those iPads and when they get pushed. Week after next, that all changes. These teachers will be the only ones in the school. When does the pre-K ever get to be the only ones? They're the only ones who'll control their own student iPads. They'll be able to purchase apps through a school purchasing program, and then they'll be able to put those on their class by class. So every three-year-old classroom doesn't even have to have the same apps. And I think that will be a huge breakthrough for ownership by the teachers. So I think my stragglers, my slower implementers will have this breakthrough when they can control that. So this is not a perfect place. It's a real school with real teachers and real kids. One area no one has spoken about here because maybe it doesn't quite fit, but I think it certainly does, which is letter construction, being able to form letters and write letters. And this is an area that I think is so perfect for a tablet because the writing happens on the screen and they get feedback as they do it. And when they write on paper, they get feedback as the teacher has time to say something. When they write on paper, they get corrected later or they don't get corrected. So it's a huge concern at the school right now that we're working through. So typically what they've done in the past is Blake will write his name on this erasable file folder with his name on it. So that's him writing his name. Well, the teachers then did things like this. They used Explain Everything and they scanned in worksheets that they already had where children were writing on paper and now had them writing on paper. So here we have the exact transition of tech integration, right? We went from paper to now paper on screen. Where they're doing exactly the same kind of task, but now they're using the screen as the surface instead of the paper. Now, these teachers are of varying experience. So we then had a really great meeting where we talked about developmentally what a 3-year-old need to do and what a 4-year-old need to do. And they realized they really needed to go backwards and stop with like forming letters and go back to tracing lines and motor control. So they started using this app called First Lines by Patchimals, and that's been a really good breakthrough for them. I will say there's a huge need for styluses for those teachers who believe kids need to hold a stylus. The app crayon was the only one I ever found, and they're gone. That company doesn't seem to have a phone number or access anymore. So somebody could make a little bit of money, maybe. I don't know, I'm not a business person. This was a triangular stylus that was a good grip size, and it didn't have a loose tip. Because they'll chew the tip off if it's not a good tip.
I've seen it on Amazon.
They don't have them anymore.
They're gone.
They're gone.
You can get them on eBay for like 30-some bucks.
Yeah.
But they were the best stylus. I recently talked to Tivley about styluses and
I have as well.
possibly like you know, coming up with one for one of their, they were thinking of coming up with one for one of their apps.
Yeah.
But we found one at the toy fair that wasn't too bad, by Lulu Painting.
Uh-huh.
It's actually in the shape of a crayon, and it has that nice silicone covering for the whole thing. And it's actually it's pretty precise for like a 3-year-old's hand.
Right. So this is a need that the school has come up with. We certainly believe that kids can write and draw with their fingers as well, but there's a transition to holding pens and pencils that is they're struggling with. So that's one of the needs. Yes.
I was just going to ask, when you were looking for, or when they were looking for apps that were writing apps, did you struggle to find apps where the app actually shows the kid what they wrote? I feel like a lot of writing apps, it's like, trace this letter A, and then we'll bing, pop it into a perfect looking A, which is kind of pointless. So did you find one that you liked?
So interesting you ask. So the teachers started with Letter School. That was the app they chose as a school, and that's where they started. They've since realized that that isn't necessarily the one they want to continue to use. And so because of the lack of app management at the school, they're actually in a good position. They're going to change in summer, and they're going to go to a different one. And I'll have to look at what the name of it is. I can't off the top of my head. So the one that has, is it French, maybe? But it has yeah, writing wizard, maybe. I'll have to look and see my visual learner memory. Yeah, because it has the line tracing and transitions to lowercase and uppercase. You should know that the school is pretty traditional. Is the newest teacher on staff has been there 5 years, I think. So the teacher's been there the longest, has been there a generation. They're teaching the children of the children. So the change is going to take time, but they realize that they were missing a big chunk of that. But I do believe that this learning to form letters, construction of letters, this is an amazing opportunity for tablet use. The children, when they get to choose, they choose Letter School probably more than half the time as what they want to do on their own time. Yes.
Have you seen that app, Ready to Print?
Yes, I have seen Ready to Print. There's a whole lot of these kinds of writing apps, and so the teachers, pre-writing and writing, and they're looking for one all-in-one because the range of what a 2-year-old comes into the 3-year-old program and an exiting 5 or 6-year-old, they want to kind of standardize that so that there's ways to move kids back and forth.
Which are the best ones that you found?
We can look at them in a minute. I can't remember the names. I'm terrible. I'm one of those, probably like Warren too. I have 982 apps. Not all on this device, but so I kind of cycled them through, but we'll look at what some of those are. We really look for ones that do allow the child and teacher to see how they formed letters.
Awesome.
Where the teachers have not in the past had a solution for that. You may also notice, I found it fascinating, this is an aside, in this classroom they use markers, they don't use pencils. And they use markers so that the child doesn't have to worry about pressure, but just motion. Which that was new to me. Works for them, so that's fine with me. But I had never seen that before. This is a very short video, but this is a new way they're using their QR codes. And I'll try to get out of the way. So he's scanning, they hit these QR codes around the room. He's scanning the QR code, and what's coming up on his screen is a letter. And then they go back to their seat, and he's a lowercase I, and now he's coloring the uppercase I. So they're up and moving between every letter, which is kind of cool. So it's a scavenger hunt of sorts. They found this one on an online site, probably Teacher Pay Teacher, and now they're making their own. So there were things they didn't like about this one, so now the teachers are moving. This isn't an app, they're just using a QR code, but they found an already made set. And so that was the initiation point for them. Now they're starting to do some things where they're making their own.
I think it's really interesting the concept. You were saying that it's a really traditional teaching force.
Yes.
I think another word for it, but teaching community in the school. And yeah, that feels to me like a fantastically inventive.
This was a huge
use
breakthrough.
Of QR. It's just like they've got the idea of QR, and you think about there's so many things you can do with it.
Yes, and so this is probably, in addition to scanning to get to a video, which is a very common use in these classrooms, not a bad use, but just common use, this kind of scavenger hunt format. And then the third thing that started now is when they're teaching in a theme, they will create a theme-based area to listen to stories, and they'll use QR codes to cue kids to the stories, because they're online stories, because they're not buying apps. So that's a way to do that. So when they were studying bears and hibernation, then they had a tent. Every classroom had some form of a cave, and that was the bear cave, and they could scan a QR code that was on the lip of the cave, and then go inside and listen to the story. So they're moving forward and using this as a good way for access, because it's quick. You don't have so many distractions. Obviously, you can't have it. To navigate into Safari and find a website would be impossible, let alone send them to YouTube. So that's a huge breakthrough. Now, they're working on triliteracies, not just English literacy and digital literacy, but Cherokee literacy as well. And that's been a real challenge because there aren't any Cherokee apps. We did find a keyboard, so the Cherokee teacher has a Cherokee keyboard with a syllabary on it so that she can type things in Cherokee. But it's a real challenge. It's also a challenge because, I learned Spanish as a child, and at least we shared almost the whole alphabet, and they almost all sounded sort of the same. But in Cherokee, you'll see something that looks like a capital D. Has nothing to do with the D or the sound of D or the meaning of D. It has nothing. So there's a lot of conflict. So these children are working really hard. I'm going to show you, let me see if I can show you this now. Oh, let's just take a chance, Gail, take a chance. So this is a real success story. This was a failing teacher a year ago, and now, that's not showing very well. She is one of the leaders of the pack as far as what she's doing with her kids. And her class made, her 4-year-olds, made a trilingual book, animal book, because we have The Wolf is Howling.
The wolf is howling.
We have it in Cherokee.
I already eat.
And we have,
I already eat.
oh, sorry. And we have,
Oh,
oh, she's making the howling wolf. So these kids have made their book in 3 languages, right? Animal, English, and Cherokee. They used Book Creator. Book Creator is our up-and-coming biggest used app. We're using it for many things. That's actually where children are starting to document their learning is in Book Creator. They know to open that app, 4-year-olds, not the 3s, but the 4s, open that app, take a picture, and add voice. There are literally, the teachers upload to my Dropbox finished books, and some weeks my Dropbox gets really, really full because they'll all have made books about an experience or something that's going on at the school. So we're really seeing an interesting process and progress there, and I'll show you one of those in a minute. The teachers actually have moved to making activity books for the children to do, but that I don't think I would have guessed that's what they would do, so that's kind of exciting too. So remembering that this is kind of a special place, they have a lot of resources, and they don't have so many resources. This is just so you kind of get a sense of what happens in schools where the teacher's growth went from just how do I turn it on, how do I adjust the sound, how do I get it to project from Apple TV, to them, the teacher documenting, to parent communication as a teaching tool and now as a learning tool. That's in a year. That's pretty good. This is what the student use has been in the first year, from just collecting pictures, taking pictures of everything, and always the least beautiful angle on teachers. It's just the way it happens because they're all this tall. QR code scanning was the second leading thing, and then there was a lot of early on free choice. Oh, we're going to get ready for swimming now. So all my kids, my 18 kiddos, need to change into bathing suits. So while some are changing to bathing suits, others are playing whatever they want. So that's one of the things that happens. And moving into creative tools where they're actually creating things. Side note is really this beginning of that documenting. It is critical to remember that 3s and 4s are vastly different creatures. The 3s, many of them still struggle to take a picture. Just the coordination required, while the 4s are well beyond that. So it's an interesting span. So this is a microcosm. This is one case study in my brain and my life. But I think there's a lot of common threads through that. I think this has been very organic for them. I fly in once or twice a month. I stay for a couple of days. I'm in their classrooms all day. We meet for 40 minutes during nap time and have a group counseling session some days, training session, discussion, sharing. these teachers had never had time to talk to each other. Some of them have taught together for 15 years. So this is an amazing opportunity, and they're really lucky that they have this grant and this opportunity happening at a pre-K level. It doesn't happen very often. So it's pretty exciting stuff. But because I'm independent and I work lots of places, I see a lot of other opportunities as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about apps in general now. Is that okay? Do you have any questions about that specific school? Yeah.
Just curious, there aren't like 100 titles that are available with Cherokee audio. But do you know Unite for Literacy?
Yes.
Okay.
There are some, but here's the rub, right? Remember we had the conversation about UK English and American English? Well, there's North Carolina Cherokee and there's Oklahoma
In the
Cherokee,
narrator, they
and
have
they're all
North
North Carolina
Carolina.
Cherokee. Even in Oklahoma, there's tribal Cherokee and localized Cherokee, and they don't match. So what's happening, and I'm not really upset by it, is they're going to end up creating their own. That's just what's going to happen. That's the way it has to happen. The teacher, Kenny Turner, who's the teacher for the Cherokee classroom, is very clear that she has a load of work to do to support what her kids need, and she's working hard to get there. She's working hard to get there.
I have a question, and if you'd rather answer this at another point in time, that's fine too. You were talking about the school has like a school app purchasing program. How, like, we are the teachers that deliver the information, but we don't know what goes on behind the scenes in the technology department with site licenses and things like that. So how do we even go about, like, these apps are wonderful and we would love to have it, we have a cart that has iPads on it. We would love to be able to get it on there. We think about funding because everything comes from different monies.
Well, let's take that
CTR.
offline, but let me just say,
Teachers
that
with
isn't
apps.
as simple as I wish it were. And the new Apple iOS with its Apple Classroom, to me, is kind of muddied. I'm not sure yet, because that's going to allow students to log in on any of their iPads in that cart and see their work.
Okay.
That's the way it's advertised, but I haven't seen it working yet. In this school where I'm working most of my time, that's not an issue because we're one-to-one. Every child has their own. But it is very complex, and in this particular school, because they're trying to track where the money went and who, is it Title I, how's it funded? There's a layer of management that comes from a management company, I guess it's Casper they're using. Then there's the Apple management system, and there's nobody in charge of any of that. We're working on that, but that's why we're going to pull it down to teacher level, and they're working out a back end so that if I need 20 copies of an app for my class, I'll buy one, install that on my 20. We'll do the bookkeeping on the back end, and the school will buy the 19. It's already got one. So we'll have the 20 licenses, so we're legal,
Right.
but we won't use each of those installment codes on each iPad. Does that kind of make sense, just in a big level?
I think so.
It's important to us that we monitor and we be legal and ethical. That's what we do
Right.
matters. Is there another question?
It was just a quick one. The grant, maybe you said this earlier, is it a state or local, is it public?
Cherokee,
Grant
it's an Indian education grant. I think it's federal money.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a public school, it's not a tribal school, so there's a whole lot of interesting dynamics. Okay?
We're really lucky to have you, Gail.
I'm really lucky to have them. I love what I do. I've loved what I get to do, but
It's so inspiring.
it's
seeing that.
amazing
Just
too.
wonderful.
And we're going to start opening to have visitors probably next school year, but we have to monitor that carefully because there's no person. We don't have any infrastructure to have someone show people around, and 4-year-olds can't do that. And teachers can't have one more thing. And you can't come on, this class on Thursday because that's swim day, and we can't have outsiders there when they're changing into their bathing clothes. And there's all sorts of trickiness, but it's a long way to get to, but boy, it's really interesting. But I'll continue to share stories. I'll continue. So let's talk a little bit about apps, just kind of in general for this age group. We all talk like it's all this new stuff, but children's books, right? This is the first, or one of the first children's books, right? It was made small, it was illustrated, and one of their big keys for selling it was they put, and if you bought it, subscribed to it, your name and your children's names were printed in the book. That's pretty big hook, right? They were small and they were for kids, but one of the things they said about it was, you have to amuse them. Has to be fun, has to be engaging. And this is 1740, so very early. Another kind that we saw was, this is one from the 1790s in England, where they took mechanical books, and what they said about mechanical books was, well, you know, if you're going to make a book that does something other than a regular book, you should conceal the unbookish part and make it still look like a book. If you think about some of the apps we've seen and apps we play with, we'll be able to see some of these characteristics in these books, and this is from the 1700s. It's just crazy. And then this is my favorite, because this is widely billed, two sources, as the first interactive children's book. And it's this, the history of Little Fanny. And Little Fanny, there's these tales, and what you got were paper dolls, and you would dress the paper doll in the outfit that's described in the chapter. So you had to read and have the context, and then dress the doll appropriately. This chapter, however, shoes that sit tight and closely to her feet, her whole appearance tidy, clean, and neat, and in her arms a favorite doll she bears, the only object of her hopes and cares. Fanny with books will ne'er her mind employ, for plays her passion, idleness her joy. So I thought it was important to know that's what they were saying as these children were playing with these paper dolls, which is somewhat horrifying. Of course, there were talking books. You had to be blind to have a talking book. When I first started teaching in Los Angeles Unified way back in the 80s, I wanted to get talking books for my kids, and I wasn't allowed to have them because my children could see. So that was one. And then this one is from the 30s. It looks suspiciously to me like an iPad. There's a glass screen, and we can adjust it to the right, and it's miniature books that are photographed in like a microfiche almost. So these things all carry forward. And then, of course, the first real book for kids was really, you know, Grandma Me. And you might, when you hear this music, right? I mean, you just remember, right? I mean, if you had any experience in these early years, whether you were a child or a teacher, this is what we had. And the problem with it was push, 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 not much story. They were great and amazing, but now the new version has come out. Have you seen the app? This is a screenshot from the app. I do think what's interesting is this kind of sense of embedded vocabulary, so that if you touch the umbrella, the word umbrella pops up in the story, and if it's in the sentence, it would also, well, it's covered, but it would be also highlighted in the sentence in context. This kind of building in that apps can do, that's that hyperlinking in a way, that we can link that picture and that word and that sentence together. We also see that in things like Tacky the Penguin, which I often demo because one of them is named Lovely, and since yeah, so Tacky gets a lot of, but I have watched children, third and fourth graders, who we would think this would be way too young for, but don't have huge vocabularies, using this as a fun and playful way to kind of pick up some of that. I watched these two little boys work through Tacky Penguin, and they kept going back because they wanted to remember certain words. It was companions was one of them, and there was like icy bits or something was another one, and they would go back to it and back to it. They were working, though they weren't intent on working, but they were. And I think that we should look for how that, when that makes sense. If you don't touch the words and you don't touch the picture, the story is still there. It's not like now the page waits for you to then interact. So it's a little bit different than some of the ways it's implemented other ways. I think we can also look at apps that provide this kind of affordance, where in some of the ABC, like ABC Music, it changes on the fly. The student can choose the language. They can touch xylophone, they can touch right on the screen and change it to Spanish and back to English, and they choose. Doesn't change everything. What's smart about it, and this is a horrible example I realized last night, because xylophone and xylophone are xylophono both start with X, but if you do Apple, it's manzana, and it jumps to the M part of the page because you're now on an M word, manzana. And if I go back to Apple, then I'm back on it with the A's. So they didn't just paint over, in essence, and change the letter. They positioned you where you belonged. This kind of makes sense. But that child control, I think, is really, really important. but they get to choose. This is perhaps not the best example, but this is another example. Basically, it's a picture book. You choose at the top a language, English or Chinese. When you're on Chinese, if you touch the animal, it says the animal word in Chinese. If I can change the flag, I've gone to English, I can hear those same things. So it's a naming pictures kind of thing. I think students self-selecting that, it's powerful. It's not teacher makes a setting that sets it to such and such, but they can actually make that choice. What do you guys think? I think that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of the content in early first books are labeled pictures. So, I mean, it's totally sensible.
Yeah, and if I'm a parent and
That
speak
age.
Chinese, do I care if my child learns some Chinese words while they're doing this?
No.
Fine. They get to choose.
If you're a parent whose child doesn't learn Chinese, it's quite nice. I mean, it's kind of anything that it gives a child the sense that there are multiple, that languages are multiple, not fixed.
And it's not
Yeah,
that
it's
I'm,
amazing.
yeah, and it's not that the default is always English, but that they're both open as equals, I think is powerful. So I think that's something we should watch for. Maybe these aren't the most powerful story, but to be paying attention to those options and those choices makes sense to me. I'm also really, really interested in localization, both localized language and localized speech patterns. So when I was in Australia recently, I shared this, and it was shock and amazement by me when no one had heard of it. But it's an interesting story about generations of Aboriginal people in this place that they go to fish and do other things. And it's a young man and his father and his grandfather telling the story, and they embed their language, their home tongue, their language in it. So it's kind of an interesting thing. But I live in the South. You know, my kids where I live never hear anything of their language. You know, the Cajun kids who live on the bayous in Louisiana never hear things that are how their people talk, you know. And so I'm kind of interested in if down the road that might not be options about kind of how we can localize language so it's more friendly to populations. But I don't know how that happens. You guys, some of you know that, not me. I also think apps like this one, this is the only one I know of, Strange and Wonderful World of Ants, has been out since the beginning of time, 5 years ago? But it has self-selected reading level. And I'll demo this one real quickly. But this page is on the lowest level. This is what it looks like on the middle level. Same page. And this is what it looks like on the high level. So this child, maybe they're starting here and they're curious. They want to see what else they could read or learn, and they could just on that page move up if they want.
Is that Lexile levels?
It's whatever the developer did. They're not labeled or have any data.
It's not scaled on Lexile, and that's part of what I had in the remainder part of is that children use that information to help them select books, and curriculum packages have multiple book sets of level text,
Yes.
on level, low level, advanced. And as far as I can tell in the app market, unless you're reading on something that's owned and operated by something like Scholastic Storia,
Right.
you don't have access to that text complexity piece, and it's missing. And kids and teachers use that an incredibly
You have to pay
Big
to have
deal.
things Lexile leveled.
Absolutely. But even if this isn't Lexile, the fact that if I was reading this level, because I'm a whatever age, or this is my interest level, and I'm struggling, I can go down a level and get some more information that maybe will help me then go back and read this. I mean, this is child choice. This isn't teacher saying you have to read it at this level or you have to read it at this level. I get to choose. I think there's value in that as well. You'll notice that the vocabulary is vastly different. The way the words are put together, and the amount of information does change. It's not a perfect world.
But that's part of how Lexiles are
Absolutely.
calculated. They look at the lexical density, they look at the number of morphemes within, meaning units within a word. They look at the number of words in a sentence and the number of complex clauses that are in them.
Right.
Which is a very complex
Yes.
calculation to make. And it's one that more and more teachers are starting to learn about, I think, thanks Common Core, but
Yeah.
it's been the reality of how we've learned to teach.
Right.
But this is something that I keep cycling back to, this
Well,
idea of text complexity.
And I think part of what's interesting is, okay, so I call it the Harry Potter phenomenon, right? If 20 years ago you had told me that any kids would choose to read 700-page books in their free time with word choices that are much higher than their typical word choices, I would have said you were crazy. Now we've all lived through that, and they're all waiting on, with bated breath till September. But we're now 2 generations in, and that phenomena is something, right? And so there's that thing about interest. If you're motivated by this, the stretch goal is better. But my husband's a scientist. He designed the space station. When his journals come in, I'm on Lexile 0. I mean, I can read and the, and, but all the stuff in between, I can't make sense of. So I think I teach guided reading workshops. I worry a little bit about this kind of putting kids, either self-putting, they decide, or teacher putting kids into boxes. So I like this is child chosen, I think is powerful. It isn't scientific in the sense of you can now say, oh, I read this many. It doesn't keep track. It's not designed as a record-keeping tool. But I don't know why. I think we could have more books that offer this kind of support. So
I think it's really interesting. We talked about designing for text, and if you go back to that middle one, the middle level, you can see that already you've got the slight problem that the text is overlapping with the image. And for children, for example, with visual disabilities, that's going to, kind of any level of visual disability, then that loss of contrast is going to be challenging. That designing for multiple text is a huge problem, because we thought about it and have found
it's
it hard.
very difficult. And you can't see because this isn't live, but there's also ants crawling around on the screen. So like that black spot is an ant on the letter. So there's a little more going on here than a screenshot shows. I guess I should be clear that I'm not saying these are perfect, but I think they're ideas we should think about. I mean, I'm using these as tools to think about things. I'm not necessarily to say they're perfect. Although, of course, maybe this one's perfect because... But I show Franklin Frog often because there are so few nonfiction accessible ebooks for little ones. What I found with kids on this one is that digging deeper for them. When they click on this character again and again, he says slightly different things. This is, of course, one of my favorite ones, which is he's helping a female hears his call, which is a great conversation piece.
Who's the publisher for this?
I wonder. But I think that this is a
really good example of one that we can't make any more of these because we didn't sell enough.
Yeah, and it's. But I think you didn't sell enough partly because people didn't know what it was. I think that teachers haven't, I mean, you guys are teachers.
I took pictures of them already because I'm like upset that we couldn't use them this year, that I didn't know of them.
Yeah. So it's the penetration into education for app developers is tough, and the knocking the ceiling off a school is tough, and so it's really hard it's really hard.
Because this in the spring, and then even the butterfly, we do that whole thing in the fall. So
and we've done we've done as books, and just an owl. There's an owl one and a penguin one, but the butterfly one doesn't exist as an app because we could afford to do it as a book. We can't make it as an app. We just couldn't.
So it's a challenge, but I do think that that's one of the big missing pieces. I think at some point, someday, we'll have enough saturation of technology in the early years that will make it maybe more beneficial. This one, do you want to say anything about it before I talk about it?
Sure.
This is her product.
Hello. So this was our first app, and it's based on a picture book. So we were really limited with the art, and we pretty much just had, sort of very static art that we animated to the best of our ability. But really the key was to create a folktale-based storytelling app that embedded a little bit of game interaction, but in a meaningful way where you could really use the gaming to move the story forward, rather than just have it be something that was sort of a bells and whistles to distract or take away from the story. So actually, I think someone was talking about this yesterday. when it opens, it's a little slow in the beginning, and the kids kind of have to stay with it to get to a certain piece, but certain part. But when we went into classrooms, if the kids were working in groups or sort of had a little bit of interactivity where they could sort of, like get the crocodile to make a noise in the beginning, that satisfied them enough and gave them a sense of the world. So we used interaction to create the world around it and then kind of move them forward into the game.
So that was a lot of developer speak, so educator speak. What's exciting to me about this is that you need to listen or read the story where it says crocodile opened his massive jaws and plover bird hopped in. The page will not move on until you put plover bird in the mouth. You have to comprehend, you have to listen or read that in order to make the next thing happen. And that to me is really exciting and powerful. I'm not dismissing anything you said, but from a teacher-learner point of view, that's making comprehension key without a quiz or a test. Or the interaction is still part of the story and you're moving the story along in a very physical way. And that's exciting to me.
Well, what's also exciting is that it's a global education piece. It's about education for a shared future.
Yeah.
And most apps that I see do not have that as a dimension.
Absolutely. So there's a lot about this, and you should make sure to demo it while you're here. And then this little app, the Big Word Factory, I'm for sure going to demo this because Warren hadn't even seen it, which seems like when. And it's not because it's perfect, but because there's some interesting things. The whole story is about language and words. And so the interaction is about language and words. And so I'll demo that, but I'm just going to go through the rest of these examples and then switch to the other, which is easier. We talked a lot about Goldilocks and Little Bear. It's one of my favorites, so we don't have to talk about it anymore. For older kids, I think that the Journey to Invention is an amazing, thought-provoking. These images are so clear and interesting. You can manipulate and look at these things, which then lead you to history and science and invention, and they're linked in really surprising ways.
Can you demo that?
I can't. I can't run it on this iPad any longer. But you have it? Do you have it?
I have it.
Okay, so we might want to demo that one.
But I think the one thing about this app and others is the richness of bringing real experiences to inside your classroom or inside your library to children. There's a copy of you can go inside the Apollo 13 or Apollo, I forgot which, 15, 19, one of the Apollo
11.
capsules. Apollo 11, yeah. And you actually go in and you're sitting there and you can look around 360 degrees and you can hear the radio transmissions between, the
Capcom,
the astronauts in Houston.
Yep.
And you can see what the Earth looked like, and it's all the authentic stuff. And this is the kind of stuff that, you just...
Well, when we were kids, we opened the encyclopedia and browsed through pictures just because they were interesting, right? I mean, that was what we had, or National Geographic magazine. We didn't have television too much.
Babbage's decoder is in there, so you can actually type your name into Babbage's thing and see what it would have looked like if the Nazis had written it to be decoded during World War II.
And you could do some little science experiments, but for me it's about, you could see this picture, but it doesn't have, that's the transatlantic telegraph cable, so that picture doesn't tell you much of the story, but it shows you enough for some of us to go, what? What happened? Why is it, what is, and then to dig deeper. So I think we might want to continue to look at how real stuff has a different role than illustration. And that's a part of, I love art and illustration, but combining them, and this, Collins Big Cat has done a good job about combining those. This particular, they have 7 free titles, I think, free apps. They're a book publisher.
Yeah, they are.
And they made these free apps, but they're really typical ebook story, but you can record your own voice, or you could have someone else record, so we could have a parent reading that, or we could have it. So in telling the story in another language, the text will stay the same, but we could hear that story. But at the end, one of the other options is the story creator, and in the story creator, you can create scenes or make your own book. You can have text, you can have multiple page books, but you can also choose to have photographs. There are some built-in photographs of some of those environments and those animals. So now we're taking this fiction story, or overlaying this opportunity to explore what a hedgehog really looks like, or what a hole might look like. And I think that's really powerful too, that kind of overlap, crossover.
I also want to make a request that if, try not to download huge touch press apps.
You don't download any.
Altogether.
Yeah.
Because they're, over 1 gig.
Yeah.
So, and I've noticed, I'm sure you've all noticed, bandwidth is at a premium. So, if you could try to hold off until hours to download apps, that'd be helpful.
I wanted to mention Exploratorium Museum. They have some incredible hands-on type of apps for the older kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's a museum in San Francisco, and
They have a great sound one.
Yeah.
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 they have one where they actually ask you to put water on your eye.
Yeah, the light one.
Yeah.
And it's free, right?
I think they're all free.
Yeah, they're free. And then I was thinking last night about the conversation about that gap after they get to be about 6 or 7, right when we know parents stop reading to children at 8 and 9 at home, and test scores fall and kids struggle, and all those things happen. And so I kind of went back through my bag of tricks, my list of apps, and tried to think about what I knew. And I haven't tested this with more than one child, so it's a little bit of a disclaimer, but I think that there's some kinds of formats that are interesting to those a little bit older kids that draw them in. And this is kind of a mysterious story, the Weirdwood Manor. And but they have these notes in this notebook that the child has access to as they're kind of working their way through this. And it combines some handwritten text and some printed text and some drawings. And I think we don't give children access to handwritten things very often. And so it's intriguing and interesting at a certain age group to think about. I'm not sure this is my favorite story, but I think it's interesting. And the one child I've watched work with it was a child everyone said would not be engaged. And he was all in. He was all in because it was his to capture these creatures and solve these mysteries. And he was willing to struggle with reading the cursive writing to get the information he needed. So kind of a success story. So something to think about. This is only an example. I wish more would do this because I think it's kind of exciting. And I apologize those who've heard me talk about this app before. Arloon, which has changed and been bought by a couple of times, and it's hard to find this app now, but it's still out there, has this app. And you see there's the tortoise and the hare, and you see how they're weird colors? They're like, the environment's a weird color, the trees are gray, the hare's wearing weird pants, and all of that. That's because children color a coloring sheet, and then they scan it in the app, and it makes the environment match the way they colored the environment and the characters.
Like with the QR code?
It's in the app. You actually scan you print out the pictures, color them with crayons, markers, whatever, and then that gets sucked in, technical term, sucked into the app. The story is the same. The characters move the way they move, but they've been overlaid with the child's interpretation. Now, Tortoise and the Hare is not my favorite story. The text of this is in, I think it's probably a European approach. But this technology idea to me is an amazing opportunity for the kids who are reluctant to make the characters look the way they want them to look. They don't get to change how they act because that would be a whole bigger, to me that's like bigger than I can ask a developer to do. But this has been really interesting to watch children. So I can, if we were working in a group, we can scan 2 different ones. I mean, I don't have to have both my own. I can continue with that same one, or in the middle I can change to another one. So we have some capability. Does that make sense?
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Do you know, those 2 examples that you have are very nicely colored within the lines. If you
scribble, it's scribbled.
Does it show you the whole scribble?
So if I had scribbled on this like this,
yeah,
then he here would have those lines across him, but it wouldn't go off of his character because it's just his character.
That's what I wanted to know.
If I don't color something,
Then it just stays that.
it stays that color, stays grayscale.
But there's something really interesting about whether or not a child would recognize. I suppose they've got the cut pictures in front of them, because actually as they've moved to that CGI sort of look, they move very far away from the line drawings that they
Right.
originally were. And so it's an interesting question about how far a child, or how far you have to point out to a child that it was their colours that had been imported.
Well, the
that
way
makes
I
sense?
did it with children and with teachers was to set that up ahead of time, which is, you're gonna get to decide what that character looks like. And of course, when I do it with teachers, I tell them to make them as wild as possible, because they're more likely then to attach to that. And then they always want to do it over and change it, which is really interesting. They want to say, well, what if I did do it? It's only a piece of paper. I've got more papers, but
That's
it's
so
out.
interesting, because of course actually if you did like a grey rabbit and
Right.
green tortoise with a brown shell,
It
then
would-
actually it
Yeah.
wouldn't be as exciting as if you
Right,
put the band
exactly.
on. It's interesting.
Exactly, and so, you know, I mean, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but what if I could choose what Goldilocks was wearing? And what color the mom's dress was? That maybe doesn't change anything about the story, but if I'm reluctant or I'm not
Did it with
engaged,
Cinderella, you could choose between 3 different dresses for
right,
Cinderella.
but they weren't dresses I made.
They
See,
were
so
not dresses you
that's what I'm, I think that ownership, I think a lot of what I talk about goes
Or
back to
Toka
ownership.
Taylor, where you could take a
Yes,
picture of your jeans
yes, and make it.
and put it in, so it's actually your
Yes.
thought on that character.
So I know it's been done a couple of times, I just think it's kind of an interesting personalization.
I've completely forgotten about the nice touches, and we've only had about 5,000 of them, but that's one. And that's, you know, the idea of taking a picture of your own fabric and putting it in. Augmented reality is another thing. These are ways to reach children and pull them into the experience.
Crayola has a virtual design studio where you can use any thing you take a picture of.
Mhm.
Jelly beans, crayons.
And then you
That's
make
right,
your
yeah.
You
outfit
put it
out
on
of
your
it.
model,
Yeah.
you put it up, you could just lay it on the model.
I could see it'd be great for older kids where they would really,
Well, what I like this is that it's still embedded in the story, you know, so that
Yeah.
I bashed AR a couple of years in a row and I didn't want to do that again, but the truth is most of that is just gee whiz. You know, it's like, okay, so you scan a flash card and now there's a cartoon, 3-dimensional looking cartoon zebra, but so what? Now, Octagon Studio, and I forgot to bring them, has food cards and animal cards, and now when you have the zebra card, if you put down the grass card, the zebra in your viewfinder, right, walks over and goes to the grass. But if I put bananas there, it doesn't. So that's the beginning of what we talked about last year, about having interaction determined by me by what I put down. Now, they didn't do carnivores. So if I put a lion and a giraffe, the lion doesn't eat the giraffe. But, so, you know, there's some limitations what they were willing to do with this first thing. There are only 6 cards. It's a prototype. But I think we're seeing some beginnings of some interesting things with that. But most of the AR, not all of it, but most of it is kind of just whiz bangs. But I think this is something a little different.
I was gonna say, yeah, I think what I find really exciting about, you know, personalizing the story, I mean, in this way, or with adding your own voice.
Mhm.
I mean, you could do it in your own language, or I think earlier you showed the example of the kid in the classroom, you know, recording in Cherokee and then
Yep.
adding the sounds. So one of the big things that I've noticed is just the sort of absence of, you know, apps that speak to kids who, you know, reflect different kinds of children. So I think like something like this, where if it were of real kids and you could color, you know, yourself
There's no
in
reason.
your skin color, that's such a great opportunity.
Yep.
So, and I just, you know,
Or even building on the photography thing.
Yeah.
How much fun would it be if you got to take a picture
picture of
of your
yourself.
skin,
Yeah.
and then the character would have the same color as the video?
Right.
I think they have stuff like that. I've seen a lot of photography.
Well, there's lots of things that you can overlay on yourself, but this about the insertion into something that does something
into a
else.
story. I think that's the
Yes,
really
I
interesting thing.
really
All these
do.
things are possible, but that
Putting
costs,
it
I mean,
into an
I think the
element.
truth is, that costs quite a lot of money to develop
Right.
in itself. And then you've got a story
Right.
that costs quite a lot of money, an animated story perhaps, that costs quite a lot of money to develop in itself. And there's not, it's very hard to get a price in real life that reflects the costs of those. So I think that quite often leads to a sort of, doesn't it, I think all of us who are developers would say that leads to a sort of bifurcation. There are things where you can do stuff, and there are things where you can tell stories. And it's quite hard to find economically viable ways of pulling those things together,
Some
even
of
if
the-
you know you can.
Some of these nice touches, though, that need to be captured are, if some of them are more direct than others. And the concept of hardwiring the child to the concept. There are ways you can use the camera and use multi-touch and use the accelerometer. So if they accidentally tilt the screen, they see a jolt and they know that they made it. And all of a sudden it pulls them in a little tiny fraction of more into the experience. But one trick that you can use is a mirror. So if there's a mirror in a story,
you use that.
all of a sudden you see your picture. TinyBot did a brilliant thing with the human eye because they actually made the camera, the retina, and it was flipped upside down and you could see the view. I think the way that Chomp does it is brilliant because it's just always on. And a lot of these dust happens when there's a step involved. You have to touch here, you have to hit here to record, and it counts down, and that just loses kids. It's the experiences that sort of just, it's automatic, it's built in, it's hard. Another one you did that's great, Kate, was really subtle. It was in one of the apps where there was a pond, and you could see your own face in the reflection of the water. Oh, that was good.
That was good.
Yeah, that's really good stuff.
That's in Snow White, actually.
Yeah.
And I think it's also in, we did the same thing in Little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah.
Well,
And we used it in Cinderella, then
The
there is a
mirror.
mirror, and in Snow White there is a mirror,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
can see yourself.
I think so.
So I never dreamt I was going to run out of time, but let me just
Yeah.
show a couple other. Warhorse is a powerful piece. I was working at a middle school recently, and there was a pair of young men who were interested in the war, but didn't want to read a book. And ended up reading all of the Warhorse because it was tied so nicely to this very non-fiction piece. And I'd like to see, I think that's a powerful opportunity to pair fiction and non-fiction. And this isn't fiction, but I think with the young ones that you could do something that's a story, but also then support it with something that's...
And actually that is, Warhorse, the Michael Morpurgo text that's on the left is a novel.
But it's historical fiction, yeah.
It's historical fiction, and then there's the...
Right, but you could pair, this is a stretch, but you could pair Goldilocks and the bear with information about bears. There could be a separate piece because there are kids who wonder, and teachers or parents may not know. And so that's a barrier.
What's
right?
amazing about
that's not a good example, but
this app,
good flicks,
And actually, the big cat thing about the hedgehogs did exactly that, where you had
and this app uses the Google API so that you can see where you can go in the timeline, you see a map. You can see that a battlefield where that horse is actually now a parking lot for a mall. So it's uses, you can use Street View.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's I've only seen 2 apps that use that, linking Google Earth and that view in with the story.
Yeah. I think branching stories are something interesting. I don't love loose strands, so I kind of call it a sort of.
Yeah.
But in general, we don't have a lot of pick your path kinds of books and stories, and I think that's great for that next age group up, because once again, they have a role to play and decisions to make. And then I have this collection of non-book books like Spot, although there's some interesting things happening with kids in Spot. My favorite is the little boy who made a stack of papers with holes in them to create his own spot. Unfortunately, his parents wouldn't allow me to collect that, so I can't share it. But he was 9, and he had made this world that was Earth on the top and Martians as we dug deeper, and so it was really amazing. And he tore because he didn't have scissors. Tore the holes and then
Spot really does need to be demoed tonight.
Yeah. Of course, My Very Hungry Caterpillar's been talked about a lot, and then Chatterpix Kids, which isn't the one you suggest, but this is one that automatically jumps. This is a little wee one.
What are you drawing?
Cat.
Oh. What kind of sound does a cat make?
Meow meow.
Does the cat have some friends?
Meow. Meow.
Okay.
So what's magical about this is you don't have to have any intentionality. When you open the app and you start drawing, it's recording the audio around you. So that's a pretty interesting opportunity for our kiddos and other kiddos to use. Have you seen or heard about BookTrack? BookTrack is this interesting idea about playing audio background music based on what you're reading at the speed you're reading it. So It's a terrible video I made just to kind of demo.
So this is a quick look at screencast book track. So it's playing music based on my reading speed. I'm a faster reader, then it will move along in the story faster.
I like
Just
it
pause
based
it
on words
and
per
then
minute.
continue it if I need to.
Now the story's different on
Page,
this page.
music change to fit the story. So that's how it works.
So that's an interesting new twist that I think will be interesting to see if it develops more fully. There's a Chrome and iOS piece, they're free. So obviously a limited number of books available. But I think that's an interesting thing to think about what that does and what that means.
Do you happen to know, I think that, are they all public domain? I think
They are. Or they're ones that, I think they're starting to work to license with some books that are widely read. But I'm going to leave you with this one really, it's like a 1.5-second video. This is what it's really about. You have to listen very carefully.
Quarter of the volume.
I do not like them in a house.
I can read, I'm reading. That's what she said at the end. Let me play it one more time.
I do not like them in a house.
I can read, I'm reading. That's what we want to get to, right? So I brought some books, and I just want to share real quickly why I brought these. These are also prompts for thoughts. This is a book, a fairy tale book. Have you ever seen this?
Yes.
This book?
Yes.
So it has parts for 2 readers to help parent or older child, younger child, or proficient child and less proficient child read together. So they each have a part, and one part's simpler than the other. I would love to see that in a kind of app format somehow, some way. I don't know how that would work, but so I brought that as a prompt for that. Do you know this book, The Most Magnificent Thing?
Yes.
This is a little girl, happens to be a girl, who is inventing things. It's very makerspace kind of thinking. And she gets very frustrated because it's not the most magnificent thing. And she has a total meltdown when she smashes her thumb. And she gets really angry because it won't work. And in the end, she goes back after she went for a walk with her assistant, the dog. She goes for a walk and kind of felt different after the walk. And then she came back and saw all the things she's built along the way. And there's all sorts of parts of each that she likes. And then she finds out really she had created magnificent things. But I think that we need to be looking at how we harness what kids do with real world things they build, and help them have those thoughts and discussions and conversations with themselves and with each other about what that looks like, feels like, and can mean. So I have that. This one is the Story Machine, which is, I use this in workshops I do on writing and storytelling, because he finds a typewriter in the attic and he struggles to make it work, and then he figures out that when he's using it, he's actually can make pictures with it instead of words. And in the end, he breaks it, and he discovers that the stories are in him, not in the machine. And I think that's a good reminder too. And then this last one, I just want to prompt thought. Possum Magic, which is decidedly Australian, with all sorts of animals and things that young children will not know. The project this is prompting is, we read this to the 4-year-olds, and they've decided, we picked 3 pages, and they're making a list, and we're going to pair them with some kids in Australia to explain those things. So that it's real world, purposeful interaction across time and space and distance. I think we need to look for opportunities for that. But we don't have to have an expert. It's another child who's the expert. And I think that's a powerful opportunity too.
It's not exactly that, but Launchpad did that a little bit with Toontastic, where they had the global interface where you could see what people in the other parts of the world were creating. It wasn't a real-time communication. It was here's my artifact, and you can comment on it, and then you can communicate that way.
Yeah, and I guess part of why I'm saying that is I don't think we should be afraid of doing something that only part of the world will understand, because the world's so much more connected now than we've ever been. Because if you read some of this, there's no affinity for understanding this possum, because you don't have this kind of, our possums are ugly, their possums are darling. True? True, it is a,
It's one of my son's favorite books.
it's a fabulous book, and so, you know, that I think this is my speech, to be courageous in what you create, because it doesn't have to be known, because part of what engages adults is it's not the same old thing, and if they get to read with kids something that's novel and interesting and powerful as the grown-up, then we've just increased that opportunity to have dialogue with kids. And
I think that for a lot of us, if the educational market was and the library market was stronger, I mean, genuinely, we're financially delivered more financial return,
right,
then it would be more possible to take risk. It's hard to take risk in a context in which you are sadly a very small part of what the market is, and the market itself is not huge.
And I think that it's my passion, and I think it's other people's. I mean, I spent my whole life in education, but I'm really, at this point in my career, really passionate about how do we help parents. You know, that's what my book is about. How do you help parents? Because they grew up in a different time and space, and their children grew up in a different time and space, and the world is busy, and economies are hard, and there's all these pressures not to make great choices because they don't know, or because they just don't have time to think about it, and all of that. And so I just think there's this opportunity. But as far as the education market, I think it's going to grow, because trickle down is how it gets to elementary. And the iPads are old enough they're coming down. Isn't that sad? But it's the truth. That, you know, now they're buying new stuff for them, or they've decided the iPad was a bad choice in 5th grade, so now they'll give them to kindergarten. Well, great for us in kindergarten, but it's not the way it should be. But I do think we're going to see some resurgence of spending once now that people figure out apps aren't free.